Fuck, we've just filled Wembley with the amount of downloads.
We were like the TripAdvisor for online bingo.
I can think of a few people that would overwhelm them having 8 steps though.
I don't know what I'm doing. Can you give me a hand?
That we don't have to do the thing that we're paid to do.
You either need a lot of time or a lot of money to do podcasting.
That's a weird one, but okay, pretty cool.
Hello, welcome to the Podcasters Podcast. Today, me and Kane are joined by a special guest. Those who have listened for a while have probably heard his name dropped a few times. It's Phil, Phil Fraser. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it, guys.
No worries. So for a bit of context, Phil hosts the Leeds Business Podcast, and we reviewed his show a while back. He's been listening for a while. He often gives us good ideas and he gets a lot of shout-outs in episodes. So I'm sure people have heard his name before. We thought, well, who better to get on to talk about the struggles of being a new podcaster. But before we start, Phil, I have got a question.
Go on.
What do you think is the best way to record a virtual interview?
Well, I use something called Riverside, and if I was a new podcaster, I'd be really keen to get a special discount code to use it.
Oh, yeah? Yeah? Did you know of any, Ken?
I know of one.
Yeah. You can't remember it, though, can you?
I do. I finally remembered it. It's Podcast 15 with the capital P.
Oh, is it? Yes. Brilliant. Any other reason you should use Riverside, Phil?
There's lots of... I use it. There you go. There's another reason.
There you go. Influencer endorsement.
We've not prepped Phil on this at all. We've just thrown it at him out of nowhere just to see how he copes. I think you've done quite well there, mate, to be fair.
I'll tell you what.
No, I mean, yeah, to be honest, I do use Riverside, and, you know, it is great. I love it. I mean, I'm not a techie. It is dead simple to use, and it does everything I need for it, and there's tons of stuff I don't use.
Honestly, we should have guests more often so that we don't have to do the thing that we're paid to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Top link in the show notes, podcast 15 with a capital P for 15% off. Cool. So let's get started. Phil, why did you start a podcast in the first place? Let's take us back to the start.
Okay, let's just put some context on it. So I ran my own online business for 18 years, sold that 6 years ago, and decided to become what I call a business sounding board. So I help small business owners to not be lonely at the top. I'm the sort of guy that you can come to and say, look, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you give me a hand? And as part of that, as part of promoting that, I appeared on lots and lots of other people's podcasts. Got them through matchmaker.fm, podmatch.com, places like that. I think I've done 60 plus. And then thought, how hard could it be to run your own podcast? So I thought, actually, that might be a good way to build my awareness in my local community and go down the whole know, like, trust route that might generate some business for me. If not, I get to meet some really interesting people anyway, because I love hearing people's business stories. So that's sort of where the background came from.
Cool. And how long have you been doing it for now?
Launched last week in August. We've done 43 episodes. I'm just on a summer break at the moment. So 10 months.
10 months. Awesome.
What was your online business before?
So I owned what became the world's largest comparison website for online bingo. There's a website called whichbingo.com. So we started, myself and my wife, kitchen table, grew all the way through, you know, the scary things like getting staff, growth, bumps in the road, and then sold to a PLC for lots of money in 2018.
So what are you comparing? Like the different places you can play online?
So all the different bingo, well, we started in the States, but then it was made illegal in 2016 in the States, so everyone decamped to the UK. So by the time we sold, there were 445 different online bingo sites in the UK, all of which were listed on our website. So we were like the TripAdvisor for online bingo.
That is awesome.
How do you start that business? Where do you realize there's a demand for comparing?
Yeah, this is a whole new episode now. We're talking about bingo now. Fuck podcast.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask a question.
This is what I talk about when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts that aren't about podcasting. So, long story, I worked at William Hill. I launched their first ever online casino. While we were there, we came across online bingo. I did a presentation to the board at William Hill. They said, no, we don't want to do it. I left, not because they said no. and then thought, hang on a minute, there might be an idea here. So I sort of rehashed it, took it out into the world, Dragon's Den style, to get funding for what would have been the UK's first ever pay-to-play online bingo site. Got zero funding whatsoever. But what I'd done is I built a very basic website that listed all the bingo sites in the US, and on it there was a questionnaire, just so when I did my pitch, I knew about the data about who was playing, all that sort of stuff. And some of the American bingo sites found my website and said, hey, can we advertise on your website? And we went, yeah, of course you can. Because selling advertising was actually my background, what I did before. So it totally accidental, came out of a failed business pitch or an angel pitch. And we were lucky. We were first into the market and grew and grew and grew as the market grew.
Damn, that's a weird one, but okay, pretty cool.
Is it public what you sold it for or not?
If you dig around, you can find the figure.
So by dig, can we just ask you?
I don't have to work anymore.
All right, okay. All right, Phil, so if you used to sell advertising, what did you learn there that podcasters could benefit from if they're selling their own sponsorship?
Okay, there's actually a learning from it that works as a podcast host. And as a salesperson, you're always taught to ask open-ended questions. Who, why, what, where, when, how, that sort of thing. And that is so much better when you're a podcast host to get information out of a guest than, what do you think of this? Or, I think this. Do you think that's a good idea? Yes or no? So that's the thing that I took from selling that works as a podcast host. But in terms of selling sponsorship, as a salesperson and selling advertising, it's all about finding out who their target audience is, how you can match their target audience to your target audience, what's the benefit, what are they trying to do. And then when it comes, and I know you guys have talked about this in previous episodes, how much is one sale for them going to generate versus how much you're going to charge them for your podcast sponsorship. And they're probably the two things I'd take from what I've done previously. Yeah.
Does your podcast rely on sponsorship, or is it more like the soundboarding business?
Yeah, so the general idea to start with was the bigger picture thing was if I can generate clients from it, it will pay for itself. But if I can get sponsorship, that helps cover some of the costs. And I've only recently started talking to potential sponsors, and I've got 2 or 3 I'm talking to at the moment. So that might come in, but that's more likely just going to cover some costs rather than make the whole thing profitable, I think, at the moment for the size it is.
I'd say that's the goal for most of our clients. If you've got something to sell, try and get them a sponsorship that at least covers our cost. Then any client you get is pure profit, or maybe even you have a negative acquisition cost if the sponsor is more than what we charge. So what are you doing in terms of selling your own stuff at the moment? Do you do an actual advert for it, or is it just sort of give good content and you get some inbound?
Yeah, again, plugging you guys again, it's something you've covered. That fine balance between, I think Ashley's quote was, buy my shit.
That's about right.
That's actually the technical quote.
That's a technical quote.
That's exactly
the balance between a real hard sell of saying, this is what I do, this is what I'm selling, and this is why you should buy it, versus the soft sell of know, like, trust. I get to hear your voice once a week. I get to see your face if you're watching on video. And at some point you'll go, I understand who he is. I like him. I can trust him. I'll buy his services. And I think that's one of my learnings from this is trying to get that balance right. And I don't think I've got that right yet, because I think I'm too much just, this is me, and if you fancy, buy some stuff, rather than the other side of it.
Well, let's go back to the start then. What were the first struggles you encountered? So when you've launched your podcast, or maybe even before you've launched, you was like, oh, how hard can it be? What were the first things that made you thought, oh, fucking hell, I didn't think that would be a thing?
Well, I think the first thing is I struggle with imposter syndrome. And anybody who's launching a podcast, I'm sure you've got people who come to see you. The first thing they think is, who the fuck's going to listen to me? Why would they listen to my podcast? So I think getting over that in my head was like the first struggle. Like, if I do it, it's like throwing a party. I'm going to throw a party, nobody turns up. So I think that was the first thing. What I did, and this comes out of imposter syndrome was I tried to learn as much as possible. So even from the basics, how does podcasting work? You've got to record it, you've got to publish it, it gets distributed, all that sort of stuff. And then the sort of tactical stuff you learn. So I learned an enormous amount from you guys on your podcast. And I think on behalf of everybody who listens to the podcast, I'd like to say a big, big thank you, because you really have been a massive, massive help. I also listened to 2 other podcasts, Podcasting Made Simple by Alex Sanfilippo, who you probably know from Podmatch, and Podcast Accelerator by Mark Asquith, who runs Captivate, who I publish on. And Captivate also have a fantastic free video course that sort of dovetail quite nicely with the stuff you do. So I did all of that learning first, and then did a brain dump and go, okay, answered 8 questions. And I think these would be great advice for anybody who's thinking about launching. So what is the podcast? Why am I doing it? Who the listeners going to be, and why should they listen? What's the positioning of the podcast? What you're trying to get out? How you're going to market it? What the product is? How you define success? And then the last thing, and I say this to all my clients, is what's the worst that could happen? And then what I did sort of brain dump for about a month answering all of those questions, and then sent it out to a load of contacts. So I think, Ashley, I might have sent you a copy of it when I first did it. I sent it to lots of other people. Shout out to Kath Lord Green, the pod, what she call herself? The podcast fairy, the pod mother, something like that. She had a look at it, various people, and then got their feedback, and it was like, JFDI, just get out there and record it. So that was the initial plan, or the way it started.
I really like the 8 steps. I'm thinking that works really well for you as someone who takes action. I can think of a few people that would overwhelm them having 8 steps though. I think the first 3 were really key, and they're the sort of things you say to everyone. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And who is it for? But then when you get into like, what is the product? For some people, that's great, so they could be planned. For some people, it would mean they don't do anything for 6 months. So I think that's figuring out who you are. And for you, it's worked because you've gone, right, okay, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to take action. For other people who are a bit overwhelmed, it might be, let's do the first 3 steps now, and then in a month's time, let's figure out the next 3 steps. And in a month's time, do you know what I mean? Would you agree?
Yeah. And that step of product was things like frequency, length. Is it going to be video? Is it going to be audio? Is it going to be solo, guests, joint? That's almost like a tick box. Like, which of these is it going to be? And within there, I think the other thing that was important for me was the content. So once I decided it was going to be guests and it's going to be interviews, I thought, right, okay, until I can get a hit list of 10 people that might do it, I can't really start, because that's sort of where I need to get to. And if you were doing it as a solo, it'd be like, what 10 topics, what 10 episodes could I go with?
Yeah.
But that was a cumulative brain dump. I sort of added bits to that document as I was going through, but that was the process for me.
Cool. Good that you've done a lot of learning first as well, because we have a lot of people come to us who are like, I'm going to launch a podcast, but I don't even know how to listen to one. Like, you should probably be a consumer first. Did you find that helped a lot, being a consumer first before actually taking action?
Absolutely. And I think I'd listened to podcasts for a long, long time before. I've been a guest on a lot before. So I'd got that awareness, and it's interesting. And now that I'm a podcast host, I'm listening more to other people's podcasts and going, well, that's a bit shit. That's not you guys. Not you guys.
Cheers. Thanks for clarifying.
We'll just edit that out. We'll just leave him where he complimented us there.
Not you guys. But I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, and I just thought the interviewers, and it was back to that question about open-ended questions, just kept sort of making a statement and was like, here's my statement. And it wasn't a question. Assume.
I just make a statement and look at you. It's like, you can do like the fluffy talking bit. I just say stuff like, sell my shit. And then leave it to you to explain what it actually means.
Yeah.
He was a podcast.
So listening to them, being on them, all contributes to then when you do it, you think, well, okay. And it's, not, there's no right and wrong, as you often say, there's no right and wrong way. It's what suits you best. And, one of the things I try and do is I ask a question and then just sit back. My sort of view as the host is I'm asking that people are listening not to listen to me. They're listening to listen to the guest. Mm-hmm. So let them do the talking. And then the second thing is, if a guest says something, I'm almost in my mind thinking, well, what would a listener be saying? You know, what would a listener be tapping on my shoulder and saying, go on, ask him that after they've said something. So that's what I try and do as a host.
Cool. And then, so you've launched now, podcast is live. From that point on, what did you find the first struggles you came across? What were the biggest struggles at the start that were you could see causing people to stop?
The biggest struggle for me was that whole thing about you launch. Has anybody listened to it? I was checking my stats every 2 hours for the first week. Oh my God, somebody's listened. Oh my God, there's another one. And that was really, really difficult. And actually, it's taken a while for me to change my mind. And this is one of my learnings, is to change my mindset on listener numbers. And I think you guys mentioned it on this week's episode about stats. As long as the stats are going in the right direction, that's good. Because you can't I don't think you can look at absolute numbers. You can't look at it and go, only 16 people have listened to my podcast. Because what if you had only 5 listening? 16 would be brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, it's
relative, right?
So that the whole mindset of listener numbers is really, really difficult.
Especially with like a hyper niche podcast. So when we interviewed Dodge, him and his team look at videos in terms of like football stadiums. Like they're quite broad show and they've gone like really viral a few times. And like they're like, oh, fuck, we've just filled Wembley with the amount of downloads. I think picturing how many people that is in real life rather than numbers on a screen is important. But then with yours, where it's niche down to business and then niche down to leads, we always talk about like a percentage of a market rather than an overall number. So like, I mean, I don't know how the population of leads and especially like business owners within leads, but I'm assuming you're probably looking at like a couple of thousand, maybe like potentially. The total. I did the stats on it. This is how much of an imposter syndrome person I am. I did the stats on it. There are about 60,000 businesses in Leeds.
That's way more than I thought. Way more than I thought.
Kane, it's a big city. It's the 5th biggest city in the UK.
Shame about our football team. But.
So in my mind, and obviously there's more. It's not just business owners who are listening, but in very, very simple terms, my audience is 60,000 people. So if I get, let's do some simple maths. If I get 6,000 people listening, I've got 10% of my whole listener universe. And if I've got 60, that's, what's that, 0.1%. If I've got 300, that's 0.5%. So it makes you, because the thing I struggled with was, okay, I've got 50 listeners, I've got 100 listeners, I've got 150 listeners. When is enough, what number's going to make you go, I've got there? Because you never get there. So as long as it's trending in the right direction, I think that was the first difficulty I found, was that I've only got 100 people listening. Well, you had 70 last week, and you had 50 the week before. So that whole number psych thing is really, really difficult, I think, to begin with.
There's a lot of people just don't have that understanding as well of how valuable their audience is, just no perception of it. Now, we've spoken about it a few times, and there's a lot of big podcasts out there that aren't run by entrepreneurs, essentially, and they don't have the business kind of approach to it. And we've spoken to people before with hundreds of thousands of listeners that are thinking of stopping because they're not making any money. And then there's people with a few hundred listeners making tens of thousands a month. So the idea we spoke about was like, we could actually work with people like that and help them make loads of money just because they have no concept of what their audience is worth. So those people will be like, oh yeah, I have this, but Stephen Bartlett's got loads, so actually mine's probably not very good. Oh, I saw this YouTube or this TikTok video with loads of views. It's like, if you've got thousands of downloads a week, you're in the top 0 point something %, and you're in a position you should be making a lot of money. Now, for some people, you mentioned 150. Say you had 150 listeners an episode, Phil. I don't know exactly what your numbers are, but say they were 150. Then if you reframe that to every single week you're in Leeds, in the town hall, speaking to 150 people, and those same 150 people are turning up every week and you're on stage speaking to them, now all of a sudden, how valuable does that look? People get paid thousands of pounds to speak to about 100 people on stage. So it's how you frame it. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. For Dodge, I'm filling a football stadium. If you're a small niche audience, like for us, we could be like, cool, we're doing a talk about podcasting to over 100 people, and it's as though they're sat in the room. And framing it like that definitely helps you realise how valuable of an audience you have.
How many people can fit in the Leeds stadium?
38, is it? 38k?
36 and a half, I think.
Well, that's when you know you've made it.
There we go. Got to fill Ellen Road.
We want front row seats, please.
It'll probably be better than the football team, that's for sure.
Not hard.
Yeah, let's not discuss our team, actually. Let's
avoid that.
So Phil, what's something that you've changed your mind on recently? So this is a bit of a trend for Ash and I at the moment, is trying to think what's an opinion we've had that we've changed our mind on recently. Now this can be in business or podcasting.
Oh, that's a really difficult question.
Come on.
He didn't have that one prepped on his paper, did he?
I did have, I've got 15 things listed here, and that wasn't one of them.
Come on.
I think, what I'm doing one of the things I did right at the start was I started building a database, which gave me an opportunity to remarket to people. What I've just done recently is I've put out a listener questionnaire to say, what did you like, what didn't you like, which episodes you like, what should I change, all that sort of stuff. And I'm sort of working through that at the moment. But one of the things I changed quite early on was one of my calls to action was what I called the Leeds Business Podcast. Originally, I called Gentleman's Agreement. I'm bringing you guests for free. Your half of the deal is post a review and recommend it to one other person. And about 4 or 5 episodes in, I got 2 or 3 people saying, I don't like the phrase gentleman's agreement. Yeah, we all know what a gentleman's agreement is, but it's perceived as sexist. So I actually changed it to Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. And that was a change I made that was straight off the bat from audience feedback. And it's interesting, Kane, you recommend, when you did the review of my podcast and you said, put some small clips at the front, as teasers to what's going on. One of the bits of feedback I got on this research I'm doing at the moment was, I don't like the bits at the start because it makes me think I've missed the podcast. I've missed bits of the podcast. So I'm just listening to what people are saying. So there may well be stuff in there that will change my view. But at the moment, I'm enjoying it. It's hard work, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, this is. I was speaking to a client about this recently, who has a very technical and scientific podcast, and they said, all my fans keep asking me to do a YouTube version, and we was in this sort of disagreement that I didn't think that she should be doing a YouTube version, didn't think it was really going to have legs for her type of content, and it would take a lot more work than what she could realistically give to it because I knew her schedule. And then she kept saying, my fans. So then I asked her, I was like, what do you mean? Basically, she had 2 DMs that week saying, do you do a YouTube version? And I was like, fine, 2 in a week is a bit of a coincidence, but comparative to the size of your audience, which is like tens of thousands, I was like, those are just 2 complete, random events that you definitely shouldn't be basing decisions on. But I really like the fact that you're already polling your audience and doing surveys of your audience. It's the easiest way to grow is just give the people what they want. But what I would say is when it comes to marketing, you have to do it based on you have to do it to attract somebody who doesn't know you yet. Like we don't really try and please our avid listeners. Like for example, we will always take on board certain feedback, but we already know like a certain amount of people or a certain group of people we're going to listen every single week anyway, no matter what we do, because they've been around long enough and they've bought in and whatnot. But all of our marketing is like, who doesn't know us? How do we get in front of those people? So what are you doing in terms of marketing to get in front of the other 59,000 people in Leeds that could listen to your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the. I mean, my background is marketing, and it's one of the things I've found a challenge is. I mainly use LinkedIn because obviously it's a business podcast and business connections and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, I've got my own database now, which isn't very big, but has emails. I get an open rate of about 50%, so it's really well connected. And then one of the things I've tried to do is think horizontally in terms of the guest. So if I've got a guest on talking about a specific topic, I'll try and find either a group or some people or a Facebook group or something that are interested in that. Because then you might get people coming along just to listen to that podcast, but maybe 3 or 4 of them might hang around and go, oh, well, I'll dig in and dig out. So I was very fortunate to get Rachel Wolford, who won The Apprentice, was from Leeds. I got her on the week after she won. So I was banging it out on The Apprentice hashtag, hoping that people go, oh, it's Rachel from The Apprentice, I'll listen, and then might hang around and listen to some other stuff. So it's what I try and do is think horizontally. Where can I get more listeners based on the guest, rather than just going, hey, listen to Leeds Business Podcast. It's more, you might be interested in this guest, come and listen. And then the other thing I've tried to do that seems to work when they do it is actually to get the guest to promote it as well, which sometimes is a big ask. But particularly when you've got a smallish podcast, any extra marketing, you can see it in the numbers.
How are you getting them to market it?
So what I'll do is I will send them links to the show. So once it goes live, so we go live Wednesday morning. So I'll send them the Spotify, I'll send them the Apple, I'll send the YouTube link. I'll send them a graphic. I'll obviously send them our tags on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Twitter and Instagram are rubbish for me, but I send them anyway. And just say, look, please, can you promote it? And some of them do and some of them don't. So one of my most popular episodes was from a guy from a company called Stevenson's who are suppliers to soap manufacturers, right? Really random, but they're based in Leeds. But they published it on their business LinkedIn page. So obviously all their clients and all their suppliers went, oh, I think he's called James. Yeah, James from Stevenson's on the podcast. I'll give it a listen. So that podcast is in my top 5 at the moment, mainly because they promoted it rather than anything brilliant in the podcast. So I think when you're a small podcast, any uptick on marketing that's targeted at your audience will make a difference.
I think a large part of the marketing you do for yourself is often retention. It's making sure people come back.
Yeah.
I notice if I stop posting to LinkedIn and he stops posting to Instagram, we have a dip in our numbers. And I don't think it's a case of new people finding us and listening to the podcast, but it's our existing listeners being reminded about our show by seeing our content on other platforms, then listening to it. But the best way to then grow and get in front of new people is leveraging their audiences by, like you say, having them promote it, being on their newsletter or on other shows, these sort of things. Right now, hopefully from this, you'll get a few people come and listen to your show, or from the guest episode we done, the review episode we done, you actually ended up going on someone else's show from that, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah, he reached out to me and said, "Do you want to be on my podcast?" And then while we were doing the recording, so it's actually in the recording, he said, "Oh, I heard your review on the Podcaster's podcast. So you got a plug with me being on somebody else's podcast.
We need to start charging for this. Yeah. Phil, that business soundboard thing? Can you help us charge for it?
What are you doing in terms of local marketing? Because I suppose, not really efficient, but you could do door to door if you really wanted to.
Yeah. I think the best bit of local marketing I've done is networking. Obviously, because it's a business networking event, so they are business people. So I can then say, come listen to the podcast. I did an episode with a company called The Biscuery, who do branded corporate biscuits. So if you ever need branded corporate biscuits, they're the girls
Were they the ones you sent us?
Work with. Sorry? Oh yeah, yes, I sent you them, didn't I? Yeah.
They were good.
I've sent you some already.
Yeah, big fan.
And I did a talk at a networking event and gave everybody one of those biscuits. And then, so the audience obviously got the biscuits, got the plug. I then did a competition where I said, post a selfie with the biscuits. Somebody called them bic pics.
Nice.
Post a bic pic. You have to edit that bit out.
Freudian slip there, I reckon.
He's caught up in his activities before he came on the podcast.
Yeah. That's a different podcast.
I thought you were looking a bit red. You used to saying it was sunburn. It's bollocks.
Yeah. So I got people posting pictures of themselves with these biscuits promoting the podcast on LinkedIn. So it had like a wave effect of going. So all the people who were at the networking event saw it, but everybody then on LinkedIn saw people who were at the networking event who posted it. So I think I got about a dozen pictures out of it. It was great. So it's the simple marketing thing is where do your audience hang out, and then go and market there.
I suppose I was just thinking about monetizing your audience. I suppose you could have like a Leeds Business Podcast networking event that was paid, or a job board, which could be a bit more leveraged and virtual. We don't see many of these like hyper local podcasts, but there's probably a lot more opportunity to monetize them, I think.
100%, because your audience are all in the same place. So you can do in-person things a lot easier than, say, we could with an audience all over the place. So yeah, there's all sorts of different routes you can go down.
I'm talking to potential sponsors who are Leeds businesses trying to sell to Leeds businesses. So I'm talking to accountants, lawyers, corporate finance, those sort of people, because they want to get in front of my audience. So again, they're doing the marketing thing of where do my audience hang out? Some of them hang out listening to the Leeds Business Podcast. Therefore, it would be a good idea to be a sponsor.
Awesome.
No, that makes sense.
Go on.
No, your turn.
All right then, thank you. What's your biggest win, Phil? I think I might have an inkling as to what it is, but I might be wrong. Yeah. What's your biggest win?
My biggest win was getting Daniel Priestley on the podcast. Now I know you guys have talked about him. It was weird. I listened to him on Diary of a CEO, then I listened to him on Ali Abdal's YouTube channel, and then dashed off a post saying I hate Daniel Priestley on the premise that he's given me so many brilliant business ideas. My head's in a spin, and it went viral. It got, I think, at latest counts, got 45,000 views or something stupid like that. But Daniel Priestley heard about it, basically contacted me, and then came on the show as a guest, which is just insane. I've got a guest on my podcast who's been on Diary of a CEO. That's just mad.
It's wicked, isn't it? What did you get from the episode? How did you find the episode? How did he find it?
It's interesting actually, because I'd listened to in the end listened to 3 different podcasts he'd been on. So I sort of knew the topics he was covering. So I think I sort of overthought it a bit. So I sort of fed him loads of sort of easy shots to go, tell me about this, tell me about that, because I knew he'd talk about them, which he did, and he was brilliant. What it gave me was loads and loads of brilliant content. So, he talks about things like key person of influence. He talks about his capstone theory. There's about half a dozen things I could then snip into short videos that is obviously a lot more searchable on YouTube that then feed into the YouTube version. So from an audio listening, he's probably 4th or 5th biggest. From a YouTube video watching, he's quite a way by the top.
Yeah, I spoke to someone who had a massive guest on, but it was for their first episode. And they said actually the episode flopped, and it didn't perform anything like they would. But for you, it did do well having Daniel Priestley on.
I mean, Daniel Priestley is. I've got my numbers here. So on the videos, he's my biggest. Audio, he's not in my top. He's not in my top 10 yet because he's taken a while. It was only out 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you're absolutely right. One of my learnings has been, just because it's a big name guest, comparative to how you determine big name in whatever sector you're playing in, does not necessarily mean they'll get the biggest audience. So my biggest audience was, and this is ridiculous, was for a long-term contact of mine. Somebody I thought I should get on the podcast. I should, maybe, I don't know. And I had a couple of guests cancel on recording, and I was stuck in that situation of, shit, I've got nobody for next week's podcast. So I just rang him up and said, right, you're on next week. And that one has become my highest listened to episode because of the content, not because of the person. It's just coincidental. It was a short-term thing. So it's really weird. I mean, that's one of the key learnings is, you can't guarantee the numbers you're going to get based on just on the guest. It's to do with the content. It's to do with people sharing it. And again, particularly on a smaller podcast, if 50 people share it, it makes a big difference if nobody shares it. So yeah, big name guests are great to have on. They're great headlines and all that sort of thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be your biggest episode.
They tend to be less likely to share. I think like the bigger they get, the less forthcoming they are to push it out onto their socials. They get a bit more protective over their grid, don't they? Whereas we talk about someone with an engaged audience, not necessarily the biggest, but they get a high percentage of people engaging in their posts. They're the ones that you get a lot of traction from.
Yeah.
So what are some of the
definitely.
talking points you've prepared? What were your...
Oh, right. Okay. I'll run through some of the pointers I have. So anybody who's thinking about doing a podcast, JFDI, just do it. Because what's the worst that could happen? You put a podcast out and nobody listens. So what? It's no biggie. It's no biggie. Also, I think on the idea of nobody's going to listen, I think, if you're interested in a topic, somebody else is going to be interested in that topic as well. So you are going to get listeners. And actually, the more niche you go, the more you're going to get an engaged audience. We talked about my previous business, which was specialized in bingo. We could have done casino, sportsbook, poker, slots. We only did bingo. We became the biggest player in that niche. So the more niche you go, when you're niche, you really need to be on a short list of one. You just be like, if you're interested in this is the podcast you listen to. So if you're interested in something, somebody else will be out there. Guest outreach. This has been really been really weird for me. People go, "Oh, I'll never get any guests on my show." All right. I've had 38 guests. Okay, 14 of them were pure cold outreach. 14 of them were contacts of mine, and 10 of them were introductions. So actually, just banging out cold emails and saying, "Hey, do you fancy being on my podcast?" works. Now, it might have a low hit rate, but I've had people on that I've seen either stuff in a business magazine or a post on LinkedIn and thought, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'll give them a shout." And they've gone, "Yeah, I'll come on." And particularly, and again, it's this whole niche thing. If you're a Daniel Priestley or a big player, you're going to get people asking you all the time to come on your podcast. If you're particularly niche, you're not going to get that a lot. So when somebody does say, "Hey, come on my podcast and talk about your niche," they're going to go, "Oh, thank you very much." As you guys regularly say, people's favorite topic is themselves. So guest outreach isn't as hard as you think it is. It's just a numbers game. Another thing I think I've picked up from you guys as well, or a couple of other podcasts, is trying to avoid pod fade. I've created a process. I've got an Excel spreadsheet with tick boxes. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Because it makes you get into the process of doing stuff. Have you asked for the bio? Have I sent it to my editor? Have I written the show notes? And it just makes sure you don't miss anything, but it helps you in just keeping going, and not stopping. I've sort of alluded to this, but I try and keep at least 2 weeks ahead in terms of content, because all you need is a couple of guests to cancel, and you're in that situation of, "Oh shit, I've got nobody for next week." I'm sure you guys have had the same.
Yeah.
Just every week for the last 4 months, actually, Phil, to be honest with you.
Releasing twice a week's great until you have to record twice a week.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the great learnings, and again, just go back on one step. You've said this a lot. You either need a lot of time or a lot of money to do podcasting, and you either do one or the other. So when I first started, I thought, do I really want to I can go out there and learn how to edit. I can't be arsed, and I haven't got the time. So I just found an editor. So thank you to Simon Treen of Western Studios in Leeds. I've got an editor. I record it, send it out to him. He sends me it back. Yes, it costs me money, but I'd rather him do it than me messing around and not doing it. But one of the highlights of doing all this was the first time somebody emailed me and said something like, "I really look forward to every Wednesday morning to hear who the next guest is going to be on your show." And that was like, oh my God, somebody believes this is a real podcast. it was just amazing. And then a couple of weeks later, I went to I was at two networking events, one after another, and at both of them, somebody I didn't know, wasn't my mum, wasn't a friend, wasn't a contact, came up to me and said, "Oh, I listened to your show. It's really, really good." And that, when somebody does that, that is just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
No, 100%. You mentioned like that being a really good surprise. What other positives have you come across that you didn't expect? Things we like asking our clients this actually. Like, what's been the best thing that you didn't expect before you started?
One of the things I wanted to do was build my personal profile in leads, and yes, that's what I tried to do, but I didn't expect how successful it would be. I've got weird people come up to me and say, "Oh, I've been listening to the podcast. Oh, I've listened to 5 of them or 6 of them." So a few months ago, I was driving and somebody rang me and said, I can't remember his name. I think it's a guy called Richard who I'd met months ago. He said, "I just wanted to ring you to say, I've been listening to your podcast and I think it's really great." And just things like that. So that's probably the weirdest thing, is just people, I didn't believe hundreds of people would listen to it. I didn't believe people would post reviews. I didn't believe people would recommend it to friends and stuff like that. And that's just been, because at first you think, okay, if nobody listens, at least I'm getting to talk to some really interesting people. And if a few people listen, oh, okay, that's quite good. But it's just grown and grown and grown. But obviously it takes time. I'm 43 episodes in. So yeah, it's as a media, it's a slow burn media, but I've still got people. I can look at stats, and I've got people downloading the first ever episode still, which is just mad.
Is that your most downloaded, or was it nearly your most downloaded?
No. I mean, it's this snowball effect that, if 10 people listen to episode 1 and 12 people listen to episode 2 and 14 listen to episode 3, you've got a number of people coming back and a number of people. There's more people subscribed. There's more people on my database. So there's more people get to know there's another episode coming out. So it's the most recent ones tend to take off a lot quicker because I've now got a
retention.
I've got that retention thing. But my biggest ones are still, the guy I talked about who was like a last minute request. There's a guy who owned one of the biggest taxi companies in Leeds in the region that went tits up because of COVID. That's an amazing story. Then there's my soap guy. It's some really weird mix. If you listed them all from top to bottom, you wouldn't guess who my top ones are. I mean, it talks about Rachel Wolford from The Apprentice. She's just got my list here. I think she's 5th most listened to. But you'd think, oh my God, everybody knows The Apprentice. She'd be, off the scale. Or Daniel Priestley would be off the scale. But yeah, so it's all really, really fascinating stuff.
Just seen you've got 100% 5-star reviews, so no negative comments. I'll put one on there for you later, though. just to make it sound believable. But if you are interested, look at Chartable. It is positive.
It's good stuff.
Here's a question for you. So, from your years in the gambling space, would you ever accept a gambling company as a sponsor? Because I know they spend a lot of money on podcasts.
I would have no problem with that whatsoever. I don't know why a gambling sponsor would sponsor us, but no, it's, I've had this conversation about gambling and encouraging gambling and all that sort of thing. Problem gambling is a very, very important topic, but it's also a very, in the number of, in the percentage of people who gamble is very, very small. And particularly over the most recent years, the gambling industry itself is putting a huge amount of money behind problem gambling and sort of stopping people gambling. So no, I wouldn't have in the same way you could say, would you take an alcoholic beverage as a sponsor because people become alcoholics? It's the same. It's different, but it's a similar argument.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what if you was to start again tomorrow, Phil? What would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Probably get a bigger marketing budget to start with. I mean, I've got a marketing budget of 0. I think I'd probably do a few dummy interviews and not publish them. So do the whole, go on Riverside, record it, and then not publish it, because I daren't listen back to my first few episodes because I probably sound dreadful. But it's the same with anything. You do anything, you do anything, you have to start badly. Gordon Ramsay's first whatever he cooked was shit. Now he's a brilliant cook, but you have to go through that pain barrier. So yeah, I'd probably do that. I'd probably record some and not publish them.
Have you had much in the way?
Go on. Sorry, go on.
No, after you.
I was going to say one of the other learnings I've got is I've got a cheat sheet for myself before I record with people. So I've got a list of questions, a list of things to remind people, and then I've got in the middle of the sheet in big red letters, it says press record.
I wonder why that's there.
I've done it. I've now done it. I've done it 3 times where I've been sort of 5-6 minutes in and then gone, oh shit.
Didn't you do it with Daniel Priestley as well?
Not press. I did it with Daniel Priestley. I actually did it with Daniel Priestley, of all people. Like, oh my God.
Oh, bloody hell, Phil.
That's rough.
The question I was going to ask was, have you had much business from the podcast? You've talked about the benefits and the people you've spoken to and building your brand in the area. Have you had much where you've been able to tangibly relate it to the podcast in terms of business for your business sounding business? Is that right?
Business sounding board. No, I haven't had any business from it at all. And this is going back to my point about this balance between, buy my shit and sort of subtly trying to tell people who I am and that sort of thing.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's fix the issue.
It's a really difficult balance, I find, particularly what I'm offering to people. So I'm offering assistance to business owners who are struggling with being a business owner, whatever that might be. It might be strategy, it might be stress, it might be I've fallen out of love with my business, whatever it might be. It's not a very clear, I have a problem, I need a solution. It's quite subtle. So until people recognize they need my service, they don't need my service, if that makes sense. So it's a difficult sell, which is why I'm pushing the know, like, trust thing. So further down the line, for example, if I'm at a networking event and I'm talking about being a business anybody, go, oh, I know you, I've listened to your podcast, etc., etc.
I think it's a common issue with people that are interview podcasts where you're always talking about the guest. Is you don't get time to talk about yourself, but there's also nothing worse than an interviewer that only wants to talk about themselves, which is where the real tough balance comes in. We're fortunate we do a lot of episodes purely us two providing value. So then people see the value in what we do. Whereas if we were to only do interviews, we'd then maybe struggle to get clients for what we offer. So it is a balance. And if you're not looking to do solo content, it's then like, okay, how do I get my value across and maybe making some episodes more discussional, that's not a word. Wow.
Good effort.
Yeah, discussion based and kind of putting your 2 cents in without being that guy who always wants to talk about himself.
Yeah. And I'm going to use discussional next time I play Scrabble. I was interviewed by it's actually a Leeds, another Leeds business on his podcast, and the way he did it, and it really put me off, was he'd ask me a question, I'd give my answer, then he'd give his opinion of it, then he'd ask the next question. So it was almost like I was the fall guy for him plugging himself.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Which really didn't make for a good. I didn't enjoy it as an experience, but I don't think it made particularly good listening as a podcast.
No, I think something you could definitely do now you're taking a summer break as well. You've built an audience. There's an audience that trusts you, that you haven't sold too much. You could do a relaunch, and the relaunch could be with the intent of getting leads. You're offering a free session, and then everyone who takes part becomes a lead for you to then reach out and be like, look, you didn't win, but here's 30% off or something like that. So
there's a few things.
Yeah.
And let me know if you like any of them. And we'll try and fix this problem so Phil makes more money, although I think you're doing all right. So, but we'll do it for the content anyway. Right. So, yeah, you got relaunch. And if you've listened to the relaunch episode, run a competition. Everyone who listens follows, whatever. You you can give away, let's say, 3 or 6 months worth of service for free. And then the idea is, can you then get enough people who enter, which you then follow up and sell to them to then cover the cost of the one that's free plus profit. That way you get a bunch of clients in one go. 2, click magnet in the show notes with audible call to actions at the beginning or at the end to say if you need help. So we went through sort of a phase of creating guides or PDFs or some sort of click magnet for every episode. So if it was a sponsorship one, it's like, if you want us to find your first sponsor or you need help finding it, top link. Or marketing, if you need our free marketing guide, top link. And it was always like, if you need help doing it, book a call or something along those lines. If you do decide to do a relaunch, or if you had the time, maybe you did some solo episodes, which were shorter, 10 minutes, here's, X amount of lessons I've learned, whatever, whether it could be a debrief from an episode of a guest, or it could be perhaps just a live sounding board. Maybe you give away 6 months of service for free, but the caveat is all of your sessions are done on the podcast.
That's really good. Live sounding board sessions.
That could be good.
Yeah.
And what else? I did have one. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, in about an hour's time.
Yeah,
we're on the next
I'll
episode.
text you, mate. It's
That'll work well for a podcast, wouldn't it?
yes. Oh no,
There's a text somewhere in the ether.
It's come back.
All right.
Is shamelessly plugging, but I suppose there's a subtleness to it. Generally, we'll normally say, a story from a client, or I was having a conversation with a client, or we did that, and it's when you're teeing up your questions or when you're adding 2 cents after your guest has spoken. If it's not, I did this, but my client did this instead, it's then just letting people know of the business. Because I'm assuming then if your issue is people aren't, they don't know that they need you yet, but if you can tell a story of a client, if that then is very similar to the situation of that person, they go, oh, maybe I should speak to Phil. So I think, that balance of you don't want to just have an advert for 30 seconds going, buy my shit, here's the offer, here's everything. But subtly, but in a way, shamelessly, I think
we've done it a lot in this episode, talk about conversations we've had with clients. And, we had a client doing this. So, you can drop it in without it coming across as salesy. I do, a question, Phil. Have you ever told your business story on your show? Have you ever done an episode telling the story of the bingo company?
I've not done it on my show. I've done it on lots and lots of other shows.
I think that could be an episode, just to be like my business story, and then talk about the success you had, because people might hear constantly you're a sounding board, but do they know your credentials? Or do they just hearing that you have something to sell? But then if they listen to that episode, like, holy shit, I didn't, when you said that earlier to us about your business journey, I had no idea. I was like, oh shit, fair enough. And then if your audience are in the same position where they're seeing you as a great interviewer and facilitator for all these guests, but actually don't know you've sold a business for a fair whack, then they'll might have an opinion of you afterwards. It's like, oh, actually, maybe I'll look into what he's got to offer.
I like that. And actually, I've had that a few times on feedback. We'd like to hear your story. So actually, that might actually work as part of. Like I say, I'm taking 2 months off. I might build that into the relaunch. So the first episode back is my story. That might work quite well.
What I would actually do, Phil, is if you've told the story multiple times, think back, if you can, to whoever you thought was the best interviewer and ask them if you can publish that episode. Because I think it's nicer to listen to than you sit there for 40 minutes telling the story by yourself. Whereas if you've had somebody that's like been a really good interview and you've left that gone, oh, they're a really good host, and you've told your story, ask them, hey, I really enjoyed being on your show. I'd love to promote your show. Do you have the audio file? And I'll put it on my podcast and I'll plug your show. And they're obviously going to go, yeah, great, free marketing. But you get the benefit of they did a really good job getting all the best information out of me. And therefore, I think it's easier to listen to those episodes where there's an interviewer and a host.
We recently uploaded one of those where we got interviewed about why start a podcast in 2024. And we uploaded it to our feed. Now, obviously, we kind of promote our stuff a lot anyway, subtly. But if we never had the chance to do it, that would be a brilliant chance for us to do a promotional episode without it just being sales.
Yeah. No, I listened to that episode. I think that's a great idea, Kane. Because I've got all of my video and audio interviews on my other website, philfraser.co.uk. Just to plug there.
We'll beep it out, sorry, mate.
It's in the show notes. It's in the show notes.
Yeah, if you say so. Well,
You have to put it in now.
Go on then, Phil. Where's the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, so they can find the podcast at leadsbusinesspodcast.com. They can find me at philfraser.co.uk. Don't go to philfraser.com because philfraser.com is a medieval costume reenactment company. So if you see lots of pictures of people who look like Robin Hood, you're on the wrong website. So it's philfraser.co.uk. And you can normally find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn most days. So if you just search Phil Fraser.
Wicked. Wow. Phil, thank you very much.
That's where you can find me.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Phil.